Good afternoon and welcome everyone to Culture Chats at Lunch. My name is Nicole Adams and I am the Genealogy and Local History Librarian for the Oshawa Public Libraries. It is a pleasure to meet you all through Zoom. I'm delighted to be presenting as part of the series today, which is a collaboration between Oshawa Regiment Rcac Museum, Oshawa Public Libraries, Parkwood Estate, and the Robert McLaughlin Gallery. Oshawa's galleries, libraries, archives, and museums have been actively engaging the community virtually throughout the pandemic. We see this series as an opportunity to share stories with both faithful and new audiences through fun, accessible talks and programs intended to support connection and well-being. As organizations all located in the city of Oshawa, we collectively understand and appreciate the importance of positioning ourselves on this land. You may be joining us from elsewhere, and I encourage you to visit native-land.ca to understand the Indigenous history and languages of where you live. Oshawa is located on treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Scugog Island First Nation and the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and the Anishinaabe. Today, our Indigenous communities continue to contribute to the life of this city and to celebrate their heritage, practice traditions, and care for the land and waterways as sacred. Today, I'll be giving an overview of the history of library service in Oshawa. It's a lot to pack into 45 minutes, so I'll do my best to cover it all. In 1864, a group of villagers met in the Little Village Hall on Athol Street and decided to establish a Mechanics' Institute library. Mechanics' Institutes were educational establishments originally formed to provide adult education, particularly in technical subjects, to working men. As such, they were often funded by local industrialists on the grounds that they would ultimately benefit from having more knowledgeable and skilled employees. According to newspaper accounts at the time, this was not the first attempt to have such an institution in the community, but people in the community believed that this time, with proper attention and supervision, it could thrive. The only access in the community to reading materials at that time was through the small collections library at the United Common and Grammar School. Pioneers and founders of the Oshawa community were among the officers and committee members of the First Institute. Serving as president was William McGill and as librarian, William Dickey. Their goal was to provide an all-encompassing library based on the model of the Mechanics' Institutes, which had its origins in Edinburgh, Scotland, where the world's first Mechanics' Institute was established in October 1821. The Oshawa Mechanics' Institute and Library Association was located in a rented room in the back of Mr. Allen's bookstore, located on the east side of Simcoe Street, just south of King Street. It served as a reading room and offered courses, as well as a collection of books and magazines acquired for tradesmen who wanted to improve their knowledge and skills. A membership ticket was issued for $2 annual fee, which entitled the member to admission to debates, lectures, and entertainment, and to use of the library. In 1868, additional sums of money in the form of a government grant for $180 were obtained for the purpose of procuring new books and to provide a reading room containing a number of leading English, American, and Canadian newspapers, and a superior course of lectures and other entertainments. Given their small premises, arrangements were made local churches, as well as the Sons of Temperance Hall, to hold larger gatherings in their buildings. Although we have no records in our collection from this time period, apart from a few newspaper articles and clippings and book plates, we did find an annual report in the sessional papers of the Legislative Assembly of Ontario from 1869 and indicates that the Institute had moved premises in the preceding year, although it does not indicate precisely where, and their membership numbers were at 216 at that time, including youths who had taken a lively interest in the welfare of the Institute. Now, after nearly 15 years in operation, the Mechanics' Institute membership began to decline, and with the loss of less funds coming in, library books became very dog-eared, and the Institute had no choice but to sell off its assets. The books and furniture being held in trust for the town by Dr. Francis Ray, who later became mayor of Oshawa. Now, Oshawa then went into a period of having no public library or mechanics institute whatsoever. And in 1884, the editor of the Oshawa Vindicator published an impassioned editorial about the need for a library that made the citizens take notice. I've cut it down here. There's a number of, it was quite a lengthy impassioned article, but he was telling the community that for a town of our size, we really need a library of some sort, and we need to draw attention to it so that we get funding and make arrangements. So I mentioned that Dr. Ray had taken in trust the books and furniture from the previous Mechanics Institute. And upon payment of $100 to Dr. Ray, he returned those items that he'd held in trust, and a second Mechanics Institute was opened on the last Saturday in November 1887 in rooms over Higginbottom's drugstore on Simcoe Street, just north of King Street, occupied for many years by by Murray Johnson's Menswear, and now occupied by Cork and Bean. This building dates from 1860. So they had upper rooms. It doesn't indicate in our resources which floor these rooms were on, but I would assume at least probably the upper floor, and there is no indication, though, to know that for sure. And we have no interior shots or pictures of this from that time. Now, the new library provided a smoking room where chess and checkers could be played. And by 1889, the library consisted of over 1,000 volumes. And library membership totaled 199 people. In 1892, night school classes were sponsored by the Institute at the Center Street School. And the number of volumes in the library increased at an average of about 200 per year until 1893, when there were over 1,800 volumes and 146 members. Now, this is an early book plate from the time of the early Mechanics Institute. I believe this is from the second incarnation, the 1887 Mechanic Institute. And a lot of the same things that apply to library usage today have the same regulations, that there's a limit to how long you can keep the book, although this is interesting that you can keep it 1 week for every 100 pages in the book. So the longer the book, the longer you got to keep the book out. Of course, there were also quite strongly worded mention of that if you damage the book, you need to pay for it, and if you don't, that you could be expelled from the library and your card revoked, membership privileges revoked from both the materials and for attending any of their lectures and programs. It indicates that their hours at that time, they're only open Wednesdays and Saturdays from 2 to 9:30 p.m. for exchanging of books. So from the period of the late 1890s up until 1906, we had a Mechanics Institute operating on and off. I think there were some time periods where because they were, there was only one staff member and it was done on a part-time basis, only a number of hours a week. There's not a whole lot in the record, and unfortunately anyone who knows anything about the history of Oshawa is that we don't have a whole lot of newspapers from these time periods. So it's very difficult to find any information about these early years. Now, it's been said that there's not such a cradle of democracy upon the earth as the Free Public Library, this republic of letters where neither rank, office, nor wealth receives the slightest consideration. Now, that's a quote by Andrew Carnegie. And for the better part of the 1800s, community libraries in Ontario relied on private funding, membership fees, and a committed group of citizens to organize and run them. The Oshawa Mechanics Institute was no exception. In 1884, the Institute had to close for a period of time due to financial difficulties, and this temporary closing galvanized Oshawa's citizens to speak up at town meetings and to write editorials to the local newspaper about them, and for their desire for a free public library for all. Now, the Ontario government passed the Free Libraries Act 1882, and this allowed for the establishment of a library in any town, city, or incorporated village. Oshawa's Town Council appointed its first Oshawa Public Library Board in July of 1898. And this is the bylaw that created the Oshawa Public Library Board from that time period. Now, this board was empowered to take over the assets of the Oshawa Mechanics Institute, raise funds from local taxes, and receive government grants, something that our public library still does today. The newly formed public library delivered service for several years in crowded rented quarters. By the early 1900s, the population of Oshawa was just over 5,500 people, and the need for more spacious library was apparent. The rented space could no longer accommodate the growing collection of over 4,000 volumes, and a solution had to be found. In 1887, the Second Mechanics Institute, which I mentioned, was on Simcoe Street. The librarian was Mrs. William Hall, and she was succeeded by Mrs. Goodall, and then in 1900 by Mrs. Jacoby. In May of 1906, the land to the southwest corner of Athol and Simcoe Street was offered to the citizens of Oshawa for approval for a new library. It was passed as bylaw number 634, and the property was purchased from Dr. Coburn for $1,500. And the building was erected there from 1906 up to 1909 for construction at a cost of $12,000, which was paid for by the Carnegie Fund trustees. This is our lovely Carnegie Library, which sadly does not exist anymore. In the early 1890s, Scottish-American steel magnate and self-made millionaire Andrew Carnegie had written that the best gift to the community was a freer public library. Books and libraries were very important to Andrew Carnegie, even early as childhood. In order to obtain a Carnegie grant, the town of Oshawa had to purchase a site upon which the library was to be built and show future sustainability for the library. In 1906, the site on the corner of Simcoe and Athol was purchased. The first library building opened its doors in 1909 at 44 Simcoe Street South. Above the entrance, Oshawa Public Library was boldly etched into the stonework, which you can see here. The library was intended to serve a population of 5,500 up to 10,000 people. Now, by 1946, it was providing library materials and services to a population exceeding 29,000, with more than 30,000 books and an annual circulation of 143,000 volumes. Now, Oshawa's population, this is the inside of that library. It's one of the few that we have of the inside of this library. Oshawa's population tripled by 1923, quadrupled by 1933, and was 26,000 in 1943. The library had become very crowded. A children's department was put in the basement, an internal gallery was added to provide more shelving, and when that wasn't enough, over 1,200 books were put in storage off-site. Anyone who works in a library will understand the challenges of space. This is another interior shot showing the additional stacks shelving that was placed on the main floor. And that I should mention this 1914 Borough Agreement, which is signed by Ed Boakley, which actually got cut off in this slide. But over the years, there have been many different types of agreements that were signed by borrowers. Sometimes you sign your library card agreeing to our policies and borrowing practices. This agreement had to be witnessed by someone because he was a young boy at the time when he signed this, and basically the same thing that was in that book plate from the Mechanics Institute: don't damage the books, you will have to pay for the books that you lose or damage, and that this can be revoked at any time. But the difference is that there's no fee attached to this. It is a free public library. This is actually an accession register, one of the few early documents we have from this time. This is from 1923, an accession register being a list of every book that was acquired over time and how much we paid for it. We have a number of these volumes ranging from the 1920s up to the 1960s. And this was before computers, how we kept track of which books were purchased. And later on, there'd be notations in the margin when the book was withdrawn from the collection. So there's a number of these volumes in our collection. Very few of these books still exist in our collection today. I mentioned the user agreements. These are a couple of examples from the 1950s, still at that old, still called the Oshawa Public Library. And these are users' names at the top where they had to sign and give their address, and there's an expiry date on there, and agreeing that they would be responsible members of the library. And also it would stamp every time they had books due. So this was their library card, but also their due date slip, which is an interesting combination of the two. I've recently posted the one on the left to our Facebook yesterday for our Throwback Thursday post, and a couple of people had said that they knew the young woman that is listed on here, Miss Sylvia Amy, living on Montrave Avenue. Now in 1949, City Council held a vote by law to build a new library, because as you can see from these examples, these are taken from a 1949 newspaper appealing to the public for funds to build a new library because this had become very, very overcrowded. Sadly, we do not have photographs of this besides ones that are from our microfilm, because the photographs were taken by the Oshawa Times staff, and the Oshawa Times, as many people in Oshawa know, had fire, and we lost many, many volumes of their archive, and the photographs included. So we do not have access to the original photographs from the interior of this library. At least we have them from the microfilm, although grainy they may be. This is actually the difference between 1906 library and by 1953, the difference in both population of the city as well as the volumes that were held in the library and the number of staff that they had. You can see the difference, and this is the part of the appeal that was made to the public in many, many newspaper clippings of the time to appeal for a new library. And there were multiple appeals that happened over a period of years, and none more fervent as the ones in 1949 asking council for a new library, vote for a new library, explanatory advertisements saying on a straight basis of need, the public library bylaw must carry for all the various reasons listed, vote yes on the bylaw, vote yes on the bylaw. And it did not pass for multiple times that they tried to get this through to get funding. But the answer came on June 20th, 1952 in the form of a letter written by Colonel Robert Samuel McLaughlin to the Oshawa Public Library Board, in which he offered the city of Oshawa the generous gift of a brand new library building. The only stipulation was the library was attractive, spacious, and well-equipped to provide the city with an aesthetically pleasing cultural center. The Oshawa Public Library Board responded to Colonel McLaughlin's offer on July 1952. The news of your generous offer to make it possible for us to do what we have so long dreamed of doing was an overwhelming experience for the board. And this is just an excerpt from the letter in which Robert McLaughlin puts in writing his offer to fund the new public library for the city of Oshawa. So the new site that was identified was, of course, where we sit now, the McLaughlin Branch Library, downtown Oshawa, on Bagot Street at the corner of Center. And this was to be part of a major civic center. So you see the proposed library building site on the bottom here, and the City Hall across the street. And you will notice as well that Athol Street at this time went all the way through to Queen Street and is now that was cut. It stops here at City Hall. The new City Hall Rundle Tower is built in this place here when they tore down the Center Street United Church. So this is a sketch by architect Arthur Eady of the McLaughlin Library. This is from 1953. And the library is very identifiable. You can still see it today, but this is the early drawing. Not much change from that to the building of the library in 1954. The cornerstone was laid November 16th, 1953. Sadly, this is the only original copy we have, and someone saw fit to laminate it, and it became creased over time. So this is the best that we have of this particular artifact. As well, notice that the Oshawa Public Library, meaning the one on Simcoe Street at 44 Simcoe Street South, will be closed from November 1st and then reopen on December 6th at the new McLaughlin Library on Center and Bagot. And it was also in the paper as well, the city was going to sell the old library building, which they did and used to help fund, in addition to the funds from R.S. McLaughlin, they used that to build the new library. And they did sell the building, but sadly it was torn down in 1956. This is the only photograph that we have of that event there, taken from the Oshawa Times. The McLaughlin Public Library was opened on December 6, 1954. The building was an immediate success. It was built at a cost of $450,000 and formed the third unit of a group of buildings erected in Oshawa's then new Civic Square. This is the commemorative program for the opening of the Oshawa Library, the McLaughlin Public Library. You'll notice we've transitioned from the Oshawa Library being on Simcoe Street to the McLaughlin Public Library, which, if you're visiting the library, you'll notice over the front doors, there is still the inscription in the overhang of McLaughlin Public Library. Inside, the vestibule included walls of Italian marble and a graceful circular staircase that spiraled down to the auditorium and children's department. Above the staircase, in gold lettering, inscribed in the green marble wall, is this quote: "The library completed in the year 1954 was the gift of Colonel R. Samuel McLaughlin, LLD, whose vision and interest in his fellow citizens created this means of access to the wisdom and culture of all ages." It's an exterior shot of the library taken, this is in the late 50s. So you can see this library has 2 floors, the children's department, which is the lower level, and then the main floor and the grand main reading room, which has higher ceilings, is here on the left. Behind this building is what was the Oshawa Legion, the Royal Canadian Legion, which sat behind the McLaughlin Library. And there were further expansions, which I'll get into a little bit later. This is the layout, the original floor plan of the library. So we're talking about the 2 floors. On the left is the basement floor, the lower floor, showing the children's library and the auditorium, plus area for stacks or storage of books, and various offices, and our story hour room, which still is there today. And the upper floor, which is the main floor, showing the main entrance here, and the main reading room, and various rooms that were divided up and have since changed over time, but were the youth room and the reference reading room, and our stacks. So this back wall here, if anyone's been to the McLaughlin branch, as soon as you walked by the main desk, there were a couple of rooms here, the music room, the music listening room, and some offices in here. And after that, there was just a wall and windows looking onto the brick side of the Oshawa Legion, which is behind the building. So not much past where the computer area is now is where the wall was. I mentioned the vestibule, so this is the marble with the inscription, the spiral staircase going down. The photo was taken in 1958, but it looks much the same today. And the spiral staircase going down to the auditorium and the children's department. And the auditorium, I'm going to show a number of photographs from the 1954 building. So the auditorium with its seating, the stage is still there. It's been renovated multiple times, this room, much recently, a couple of years ago, to modernize and improve upon it, but it looks much the same today. The children's desk. So I love this picture of the staff member and kids picking out books at that children's desk at our lower floor. This is from about 1959. The children's area looking out onto the children's patio. For those of you that have taken part in our takeout service during our COVID pandemic shutdown, this is where you pick up your books at the McLaughlin branch, coming through the side doors here and picking up your books on this patio. This is from 1958 as well. These were professionally commissioned photographs of the building. This is our music listening room, as I mentioned, which is roughly where our photocopier is now. There are lots of cabinets with various equipment where people could listen to music. This is the main desk, which was along the wall as you come into the front doors are here on the right. So there was a very long desk here for many years up until the renovation of that room in the 2000s. This is the main reading room looking towards the window. This room is a lot more crowded now with many, many bookshelves because, of course, our collection continues to grow and there's not as many tables and chairs in this room to sit and read. There are some, of course, quiet nooks, but these shelves still are right where they are now, the original shelving from 1954. The same room looking the other way towards the front door and the large mural painting by William Winter on the wall, which still sits there today. And the circulation desk where we showed before is along this wall here. And there's doors you can see at various places entering into some of the rooms. This is a close-up of the mural, the artwork by William Winter, created specifically for the library's opening in 1954. And the artist himself had said that he visited lots of libraries and took sketches of what people did in libraries, and then he created these 6 panels. And this Each panel is 3 feet high, and this is over 25 feet long, and it's in 6 separate panels. This is the desk showing the other way, looking towards the music room and the back of the library. And this is actually the reference reading room. This window here is still there. It's part of what we call our local history room today, but there was a wall dividing this room into 2, and the youth room was on the other side. So that what we call the teen space was on the other side, where all the side windows are. Another example of agreements that you make for the library is a plate in the front of the McLaughlin Public Library, plate for one of our earlier books. It shows, of course, that you must not damage the books. You pay for the books that you borrow. There's no renewals allowed at this point, so they're not allowing anyone to renew any books. And that you must sign an agreement to borrow materials from the library. And these were in front of all of the books in the library at that time from the original opening. Now in 1966, they opened a technology wing, which included what we call the 3rd floor, but it's actually just the 2nd floor. The children's in the basement, the main floor, and the 2nd floor, which includes our technical services department, which is the where we process all the incoming books, and lots of the offices, our HR department and graphics department and things are up on that floor. And they called it the technology wing. So the 3rd floor was added. And this is the ribbon cutting there from 1966. And this shows the extension of the library. So you can see the top pictures from the 50s. So it only has what we call the main floor and the lower floor. On the picture on the bottom, you can see that there's actually a 2nd floor added into the rear of the main reading room. So this is actually what I was mentioning, that technology wing, which is what they called it at the time, the technology wing, which we call the 3rd floor, but it technically is the 2nd floor. This is actually a story time from the 1970s. So we do lots of programs in the library. So much like with the Early Mechanics Institute, we did programs for adults. We actually branched into lots of different programs for all ages, and story time is one of the core things that we offer at the library still to this day, even online. We have virtual story times happening. Now, in 1962, 8 years after he had presented the city with the keys to the McLaughlin branch library, Colonel R.S. McLaughlin generously donated a bookmobile to the city of Oshawa. The trailer was electrically lit, heated, and cooled by a special meter that the Public Utilities Company of Oshawa installed at each site where it would park. The trailer was the only air-conditioned department of the Oshawa Public Library at that time. So in 1962, if you wanted air conditioning at work, you had to work on the bookmobile. In the first 3 months of operation, 111 adults and 357 children registered at the traveling library. The first full year of bookmobile service was a busy one with 191 stops and a circulation of 23,326. Another shot of this particular bookmobile. This is our first bookmobile, 1962. Which was used up until, and actually the next shot actually shows the route of that little bookmobile. I love the little graphic of the little truck carting the bookmobile behind it. And this shows all the stops around the city. Because at the time, McLaughlin Library downtown was the only library in the city. So this is how they accomplished getting books out to the wider community. And it had multiple stops. They would visit each stop twice per month. And there was a schedule for those. In 1978, a new bookmobile with 4-wheel drive and automatic transmission and replaced the old truck and trailer, which had broken down in 1977, and was officially presented by Miss Isabel McLaughlin, who is the daughter of R.S. McLaughlin. Sadly, R.S. McLaughlin passed away in January of 1972, but his family continued with the philanthropy. This is the inside of that newer bookmobile. You can see how crowded it is. Oftentimes, it was mainly a lot of children who would come out. They would park at schools and borrow books that were replenished from the main collection. So there was constantly a new selection of books added to the bookmobile collection so that there wasn't always the same books that they saw when they visited. With the growing city came a new branch in the north end of the city in which opened in February of 1969. The North Simcoe branch was located in a leased space in a shopping plaza at 1050 Simcoe Street North. The plaza is still there. It opened with a collection of 60,000 volumes and registered 6,300 new members in the first year and offered regular story times and educational programs. Now, in 1979, after 10 years of operation, the lease on the North Simcoe branch was renewed, but on a short-term basis because they had ideas for building a new library. Now, at this time, the library board began plans to expand or relocate in North Oshawa to meet increasing demand as the city continued to grow. This is just some interior shots of the what they called the North Simcoe branch. These are taken from about the mid-1970s, 76, I believe. This is the Northview Branch Library. On January 7th, 1986, the provincial grant donated $570,000 to help build a new $1.7 million North Oshawa Public Library branch. The City and Library Board shared the $1.1 million left to pay for the construction of the building, which we built at the northwest corner of Beatrice and Ritson Road. Ruth Brooking, the library's chief executive officer at that time, said the $1.7 million cost would include furnishings and addition to the building. The new 13,000 square foot one-story building replaced the 3,500 square foot branch. The new branch was much needed because the old storefront library was bursting at the seams and could no longer adequately serve North Oshawa. The new branch was strategically located in an area of high residential density. The northwest corner of Beatrice and Ritson was considered a highly visible location in the city's fastest growing residential section. This is a floor plan of the original drawings from the North Oshawa branch. At the time when this was created, they didn't know what they were calling it. And the footprint of this library remains the same today. Some things have been rearranged, but one thing remains constant is the story time pit in the corner, the auditorium, what we call the non-quan room, and the book shelving, the children's collection on the right and the adult collection on the left with seating. This is a clipping from the paper in 1986 showing the iconic ceiling of Northview being raised, built with Douglas fir from British Columbia. An interior shot of the library after opening in 1986, showing that some people call the upside down canoe. Someone at the opening had called it, looked like Noah's Ark. And so it had a lot of skylights in the top, it still does, and windows around the perimeter. But there's no posts down the middle of the library, so that the ceiling and those beams do all the heavy lifting for the ceiling. This was taken just a few years ago, that same ceiling. Some things have changed. The flags that used to hang there are no longer there. The collection has been rearranged a little bit, but very much still a very modern looking library for all of its years. Bright and modern place, an open concept building without pillars, as I mentioned, and the exterior was done in buff colored brick and a complementary tile roof, and large windows on the northwest and east walls. And then there's the, you can see right through the library, and that was done intentionally from one end to the other. I'm standing in the children's department here, looking all the way to the adult department at the other end. And the sound in this library carries. I worked in this library for a number of years, and you can hear things from one end to the other very, very easily. The acoustics are very good. Now the Just Hand Library, before Oshawa Public Libraries included a South End branch, people living in South Oshawa had limited access to library services. Now, for a long time, they had only the downtown library to visit, and this depended on finding the means to get there. Statistics showed that the library usage was increasing, and there was a need for services to be extended to the South Oshawa community. For 3 decades, temporary solutions ranged from book deposit at Cedardale Public School, a mobile trailer at St. Peter's Anglican Church, and service at Sydenham Post. Robert Hahn's generous gift of rent-free space in Lake Vista Plaza at Wentworth and Cedar finally gave South Oshawa's residents a permanent library. The gift was made in memory of Robert's father, Jess Hahn. And the library, of course, is named in his honor. Mr. Hahn's generosity continued when he extended the library's rent-free space from 15 years to 25 consecutive years. It's the interior of the library here. From 1978. The Just Hand branch opened on March 1st, 1977, and within 10 months, the branch circulated 75,000 items to a membership of 4,500. It was later renovated in 1989 with funds from the Just Hand Reserve. And then in 2007, Oshawa Public Library celebrated 30 years of serving the South Oshawa community by renovating the Just Hand branch. The new design, including a reading area with a fireplace, a dedicated children's space with large murals, bright furniture, and a new children's computers. Wireless internet access was also provided, and a new career center with technological resources. Now, this is the 1974 McLaughlin branch showing before the renovation, but it needed more space, and so the Legion from the rear of the library was torn down, and you see the library here on the right. The Legion was torn down in 1975, and then the extension was made to the McLaughlin Library. You see here workers building the back half, and the EA level school can be seen in the background. And then this is the extended portion that was put on. This extension went up in 1978 and included, and you can see the bookmark here, so sort of celebrating from 1864, the Mechanics Institute, to the new extension in 1978. And this houses the bulk of the adult collection, including our computer area. These are pictures from 1978, if you can't tell from the very 70s yellow color, which was at the library for many years until it was renovated in 2010. This is the AV area in this new extension. So lots of music albums you can see there. And the front desk again from just after the renovations of the early 80s. The desk is still in place there, and you can see that there still aren't computers on the desk. So that's how you can kind of tell it's not too modern, as well as the clothing that people are wearing. This is that space today. This is where the desk would have been, the entrance to our local history room, and the front desk would have been along this entire wall. And the painting, as I mentioned in earlier slides, is still there in full color. Now, new technologies have always been a part of the library, and these are some interesting shots from the early to mid 80s, actually, with the new technologies coming in, the computers coming in. These are some of the library staff showing residents the wonders of technology. And anyone who's visited the library in recent years knows that computers are one of the core services that we do offer. And this is the launching of the internet service in 1994, offering computers and internet in McLaughlin branch. This is in the extension that was built in 1978. Now, we have 4 locations in the city. I haven't really touched on the newest branch, which is, of course, the Legend Center branch, which opened in 2006 and is now called the Del Park Homes Center branch. I haven't been able to touch on that in this short time period. There will be probably a second video talking about the more modern history of the library. And our tagline is "Find yourself here." Now, sadly, during the pandemic, we can't let you come into the library at this moment, but we look forward very much to having you come in again. People aren't necessarily gathering at the door like in this image, but this is taken from people lining up for our annual book sale, which is now used to be twice a year before we closed for the pandemic. So we hope to see you back at the library very soon. Thank you all for joining us today. I invite you to ensure that you have every Friday at noon booked in your calendar until May 21st, so the next week is the last one, for Culture Chats at lunch. Next up, for next Friday, is the Ontario Regiment RCAC Museum with Into the Trenches. Learn more about the history and development of the Ontario Regiment RCAC. In 1914, Canada is embroiled in a conflict of global proportions, the Great War. The 34th Ontario Battalion is quick to prepare for war and raises 2 Canadian Expeditionary Force battalions to serve overseas for the first time in our history. Please visit the RMG, Robert McLaughlin Gallery website, and follow the Culture Chats link for the link to join the program, and no registration is required. Wishing you all a wonderful weekend and take care.